My name is Harper Bennett and am 29 years old. Right now, I'm standing at my parents' Thanksgiving table in Connecticut, surrounded by 15 relatives who just heard my father call me his disappointment daughter. My younger brother just announced his partnership at a prestigious law firm, and everyone's applauding while my mother beams with pride. They don't know that my phone is buzzing in my pocket with an email I haven't opened yet, an acquisition offer for the agricultural technology company I've spent 4 years building despite every attempt they made to destroy it. The subject line reads, "Final terms approved." I'm deciding whether to walk out right now or stay for what comes next. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, or if you've built something despite people telling you it was impossible, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story gets intense, and you won't want to miss what happens when I finally tell my parents the truth. Trust me, the look on their faces was worth every single moment of pain. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Growing up in an upper-middle-class Connecticut suburb should have been idyllic, but in the Bennett household, love came with conditions I could never meet. My father, Richard Bennett, was a corporate lawyer who measured success in billable hours and country club memberships. My mother, Patricia Bennett, was a cardiologist who spent more time examining hearts in operating rooms than understanding the one breaking inside her own daughter. And then there was my brother, Blake, 3 years younger, and absolutely perfect in every measurable way. The pattern started early, so early I sometimes wonder if I ever had a chance. Blake brought home report cards with straight A's while I struggled to maintain A's and B's, not because I wasn't smart, but because I spent my time reading about sustainable agriculture and environmental science instead of memorizing whatever my parents deemed important. When Blake expressed interest in debate team and mock trial, our parents hired private coaches and drove him to competitions across 3 states. When I mentioned wanting to visit a working farm, my mother laughed and said I could play in dirt when I retired. I loved nature from the moment I could walk. I remember being 7 years old, planting tomato seeds in cups on our back porch, checking them every morning with the kind of hope that only children possess. My father found them one afternoon and threw them away because they looked messy. He didn't tell me first. I came home from school and they were just gone, replaced by ornamental flowers my mother had ordered from a catalog. That was the first time I learned that my interests didn't matter in the Bennett household. It wouldn't be the last. High school was when the divide became a chasm. Blake sailed through advanced placement classes while I fought to pursue anything related to environmental science or agriculture. My guidance counselor suggested I apply to schools with strong agricultural programs, but when my parents found the applications, my father actually ripped them up in front of me. I can still see his face, red with anger that I couldn't understand. "You want to be a farmer? That's for people who can't get real jobs." My mother stood behind him, silent as always, her silence the loudest form of agreement. They forced me into a pre-med track despite my repeated protests. I failed chemistry twice, not because I couldn't understand it, but because every time I sat down to study, I felt like I was suffocating. My parents responded by hiring tutors and taking away what little freedom I had. Blake, meanwhile, got accepted to Yale for undergraduate studies with a full scholarship. The day his acceptance letter arrived, my parents threw a party. 2 weeks earlier, when I got accepted to a state university with a decent business program, my mother told 3 people at church and looked embarrassed the entire time. College became my first taste of real freedom, even if it was partial. I enrolled at the state university for a business degree, a compromise that left everyone unhappy but at least got me out of the house. What my parents didn't know was that I declared a minor in environmental science, hiding it from them for 3 full years. I took early morning classes they never asked about and spent weekends volunteering at community gardens while telling them I was at the library. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Blake graduated summa cum laude and went straight to Yale Law School. I graduated with decent grades and what my parents called the wrong interests. I took a job at a small, sustainable food company in Boston, working on supply chain logistics for local farms. The work paid $38,000 a year, barely enough to cover my shared apartment and student loans, but I loved it. I was actually helping farmers connect with consumers, solving real problems, making a tiny difference in the world. My parents were mortified. They told their friends I was doing consulting work and changed the subject as quickly as possible. At family gatherings, Blake's achievements dominated every conversation. Did you hear Blake made law review? Blake is interviewing with the top firms in New York. Blake might clerk for a federal judge. I sat at the far end of the table, invisible, watching my mother's face light up when she talked about her son and dim when anyone asked about me. The strange thing about being the disappointment child is that you start to believe it. You internalize the message that something is fundamentally wrong with you, that your dreams are silly, that your interests are worthless. I spent my early 20s not just fighting against my parents' disapproval but against the voice in my own head that sounded exactly like my father, telling me it'd never amount to anything real. But there was a spark in me that refused to die completely. A stubborn little flame that kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong about me. At 25, I got the opportunity that could have changed everything. A competitive agricultural innovation fellowship in the Netherlands, 6 months of intensive training in cutting-edge farming technology, studying under some of the brightest minds in sustainable agriculture. The program accepted only 12 fellows worldwide each year. I spent 3 months on my application, writing and rewriting my essays at 2 in the morning after work, gathering recommendations from professors who actually believed in me. The acceptance email arrived on a Tuesday morning. I read it 7 times, certain I was misunderstanding, but there it was. Congratulations, Harper Bennett. Full scholarship. Stipend included. Start date in 3 months. I cried in the bathroom at work for 20 minutes. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when you realize that maybe you're not crazy. Maybe your dreams actually matter. Maybe someone somewhere sees your potential. I made the mistake of telling my parents. I drove to Connecticut that weekend, nervous but excited, certain that this prestigious fellowship would finally prove I was serious, that my path had value, that I wasn't just wasting my life on foolish pursuits. My father was working in his home office when I arrived. My mother was arranging flowers in the dining room. Blake wasn't there, off at some legal conference, which actually felt like a relief. For once, it'd have their full attention. I told them about the fellowship, watching their faces for any sign of pride or excitement. My mother set down her pruning shears and looked at my father. My father leaned back in his chair and asked how much it paid. When I explained it was a learning opportunity with a small stipend, he shook his head. 6 months off your career track, for what? To learn about plants? My mother asked if this would affect my ability to get a real job later. They made it sound like I was announcing I'd joined a cult rather than won a competitive international fellowship, but they smiled and said they supported me. My mother even hugged me, told me she was proud I was pursuing my interests. My father said we'd talk more about the details later. I left feeling uncertain but hopeful. Maybe they were finally coming around. Maybe this fellowship would be the bridge between us. I was so naive. Over the next 6 weeks, strange things started happening. The fellowship coordinator called me with unusual questions about my work history, asking why there were gaps that didn't exist. I received an email asking me to confirm details about my academic record that were already in my application. Then I got a call from a professor I'd listed as a reference. Confused because someone had contacted him claiming to be verifying my application but asking strange questions about my mental health and reliability. I didn't connect the dots until it was too late. 2 weeks before I was supposed to fly to Amsterdam, I received an email from the fellowship director. After careful consideration, we have decided to withdraw your fellowship offer. There were concerns about your fit with the program. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. The email was formal, cold, final. No explanation beyond the vague mention of concerns. No opportunity to address whatever issues they thought existed. I was devastated in a way I hadn't been since childhood. I called the director, begging for clarification, asking what I'd done wrong. He was uncomfortable on the phone, clearly not wanting to elaborate. Finally, he said that they'd received information from a reliable source, suggesting I had commitment issues and a history of abandoning projects. When I pressed him on who had provided this information, he said he couldn't disclose that, but it was someone who claimed to know me well and was concerned about my ability to complete the program. I spent 3 days in bed, unable to work, unable to function. My roommate brought me soup and told me that fellowship programs were political, that it wasn't my fault, that other opportunities would come. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The timeline was too suspicious. The questions about my mental health too specific. I started thinking about who could have done this. Who would want to destroy this opportunity for me? 3 months later, I went home for Christmas. It was painful, as all family gatherings had become, but I forced myself to go. Blake was there with his new girlfriend, a law student from Columbia. My parents were ebullient, showing off their perfect son and his perfect girlfriend. I sat in the living room, barely participating, when I heard my father on the phone in his study. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his voice carried. He was talking to a colleague, someone from his old college network. They were laughing about something, and then I heard my father say, "Remember when I told you about Harper's Netherlands thing?" I had to shut that down. Called in a favor with the director, old fraternity brother, told him she wasn't ready, that she has trouble following through, protected her from making a huge mistake. The man on the other end said something I couldn't hear, and my father laughed again. "She doesn't know. She thinks they just changed their minds. Sometimes you have to save your kids from themselves." I stood in the hallway, frozen, as the truth crashed over me. My own father had sabotaged the most important opportunity of my life, not because he was protecting me, but because he genuinely believed my dreams were worthless, that I needed to be saved from pursuing them. He had used his connections, lied about me to a program director, destroyed my reputation, and felt proud of himself for doing it. I walked into his study. He looked up, saw my face, and knew immediately that I'd heard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked him why. He set down the phone and said, "Because that fellowship was a waste of time. You need to focus on building a real career, not chasing pipe dreams about farming." I told him he had no right to make that decision for me. He stood up and said, "As long as I'm your father, I have every right to guide your choices." The fight that followed was nuclear. I said things I'd held inside for 25 years. He said things that confirmed every fear I'd ever had about his opinion of me. My mother rushed in, trying to mediate, but she sided with him immediately. "You're being dramatic, Harper. Your father only wants what's best for you." Blake stood in the doorway, uncomfortable, but when I looked at him for support, he just shook his head and said, "Maybe they have a point. Maybe you're not ready for something that intense." That was when I realized I was completely alone. My entire family believed that my dreams were delusions, that my interests were embarrassments, that I needed to be managed and controlled and saved from myself. I left that night, drove back to Boston in tears, and didn't speak to any of them for 4 months. The depression that followed was suffocating. I lost my job at the sustainable food company because I couldn't focus, couldn't perform, spent most days staring at my computer screen and seeing nothing. My parents called occasionally, never to apologize, always to check if I was ready to be reasonable yet. Blake sent texts saying he loved me, but I needed to understand where they were coming from. Nobody seemed to grasp that they had sabotaged my life and felt justified doing it. But somewhere in the darkness of that spring, something shifted. Maybe it was hitting rock bottom. Maybe it was realizing I had nothing left to lose. I started thinking that if my family was going to undermine me anyway, I might as well pursue exactly what I wanted. Their approval was never coming. Their support was conditional on me becoming someone I wasn't. So why was I still trying to earn something they'd never give? That's when the idea started forming. If I couldn't join someone else's agricultural innovation program, maybe I could build my own solution. Maybe I could create the technology that I wished existed. Maybe I could prove them wrong, not by arguing, but by succeeding so undeniably that even they couldn't dismiss it. I started sketching out ideas in a notebook, researching what technologies existed for small-scale urban farming, where the gaps were, what problems needed solving. I taught myself basic coding through free online courses. I spent every spare moment learning, planning, building the foundation of something that didn't exist yet, but burned bright in my imagination. At 26 years old, broken, alone, and exhausted, I decided to start a company. Not because I thought it would make me rich, not even because I thought it would succeed, but because I needed to prove to myself that my dreams had value, even if I was the only person who ever believed in them. The idea crystallized late one night in my cramped studio apartment in Boston. I was watching a documentary about urban food deserts, areas where fresh produce was scarce and expensive, when it hit me. Indoor farming was growing, but the technology was either too expensive for small operations or too simplistic to provide real value. There was a gap in the market for affordable, sophisticated monitoring systems that could help urban farmers optimize their growing conditions. Sensors that tracked soil moisture, nutrient levels, light exposure, temperature fluctuations. An app that could analyze the data and provide actionable recommendations. Technology that democratized precision agriculture. I lived on nothing for months while I built the initial prototype. I worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop, afternoon hours doing freelance data entry, evening work at a restaurant. I slept 4 hours a night and spent every other waking moment coding, researching, testing. My apartment became a laboratory filled with soil samples, LED lights, and makeshift growing stations. My roommate moved out, unable to handle the chaos. I could barely afford the rent alone, but I couldn't stop. The work consumed me in the best possible way. That's when I met Desmond Wallace. He came into the coffee shop one morning, ordered an espresso, and sat at the corner table with his laptop covered in coding stickers. We started chatting during my break, one of those random conversations that changes your life. He was a software engineer at a tech company downtown, and when I mentioned I was building an agricultural monitoring app, his eyes lit up. By the end of that conversation, Head offered to look at my code. By the end of the week, Head offered to partner with me. Desmond became my co-founder and the first person who truly believed in my vision. We agreed on a 50-50 equity split since neither of us had money to contribute. He worked evenings and weekends after his day job, helping me build a much more sophisticated system than I could have created alone. We tested our sensors in community gardens around Boston, asking urban farmers what they needed, what frustrated them, what would actually help them grow better food. The grinding phase was brutal. I was working 70 hours a week between my jobs and the startup. Desmond was pulling similar hours. We communicated mostly through late-night messages and weekend coding sessions. Our prototype evolved slowly, but it evolved. We developed a sensor system that was affordable to manufacture, durable enough for outdoor use, and sophisticated enough to provide real value. Our app interface was clean and intuitive. We filed for our first patent. We named the company TerraMetrics. 6 months into building TerraMetrics, I made the mistake of mentioning it at a family dinner. I'd been avoiding my parents, but guilt got the better of me when my mother called, crying about how I never visited anymore. I drove to Connecticut on a Sunday, determined to keep the visit short and superficial. But Blake asked what I was working on now, and in a moment of weakness, I told them about TerraMetrics. My father laughed. Not a chuckle, but a full, dismissive laugh. "Another one of your hobbies," he said, cutting into his roast beef. "How long until you give up on this one?" My mother tried to soften it. "That's nice, dear. When will you have time to get a real job?" Blake, attempting to be supportive in his clueless way, offered to connect me with real entrepreneurs from his network, people who could show me how actual businesses work. I declined, and he looked offended, as if I'd rejected a generous gift rather than a condescending offer. I left dinner angry but determined. Their dismissiveness only fueled my motivation. Desmond and I pushed harder. We got our first paying customer, a community garden network in Cambridge that managed 15 locations. They paid us $500 a month, barely anything. but it was real revenue from a real customer solving real problems. We didn't tell anyone. This success was ours alone. Then came the second betrayal, smaller than the fellowship sabotage, but sharp nonetheless. After 8 more months of work, we finally got a meeting with a potential angel investor. I'd spent months networking, attending startup events, building relationships. One connection led to another, and eventually, I secured a meeting with Gerald Finch, a retired executive who invested in early-stage agricultural technology companies. I prepared for 2 weeks, created financial projections, market analysis, competitive landscape research, practiced my pitch until I could deliver it in my sleep. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at his office in downtown Boston. I told my parents about it because, despite everything, some stupid part of me still wanted their approval, still hoped they'd finally see I was serious. The Monday before my meeting, Gerald Finch's assistant called. "Mr. Finch needs to reschedule indefinitely." There was no explanation, no alternative date offered. I was confused but tried to follow up. The assistant was evasive. "Mr. Finch has decided to pursue other opportunities at this time." When I pressed for clarification, she became uncomfortable and ended the call. I found out what happened through a mutual connection 3 weeks later. Gerald Finch was a member of the same country club as my father. They'd spoken at the club bar. My father had casually mentioned his daughter was pitching some agricultural technology startup and wasn't ready, that she had a pattern of jumping between ideas, that investing would likely be a waste of money. Had suggested Gerald look at a startup founded by one of Blake's law school friends instead. Gerald took the advice, canceled our meeting, and invested $75,000 in the other company. When I confronted my father, he didn't deny it. He said he was protecting me from embarrassment. "You weren't ready for that investor, Harper. I saved you from making a fool of yourself." The fact that he genuinely believed this, that he saw his sabotage as fatherly care, made it even worse. That was when I made the decision that probably saved TerraMetrics. I stopped telling my family anything. Complete information blackout. They had no idea where my company was located, who we were talking to, what progress we were making. I networked exclusively in circles they didn't touch. I focused on Boston area investors they'd never meet. I built in the shadows, away from their destructive reach. Desmond watched me go through this and said something he'll never forget. "Your family is terrified of your success. If you succeed on your own terms, it proves they were wrong about you. They'd rather see you fail than admit they misjudged who you are." That perspective shifted something in me. Their sabotage wasn't really about me at all. It was about protecting their own narrative, their own worldview, their own need to be right. TerraMetrics slowly gained traction. We added 2 more community garden networks as customers. Our monthly revenue grew to $8,000. A local tech blog featured us in a roundup of promising Boston startups. We hired our first engineer, a recent MIT graduate who believed in our mission and was willing to work for equity and a minimal salary. We were still broke, still struggling, but we were building something real. I lived on nothing, poured every dollar back into the company. My apartment was tiny, my furniture thrift store finds, my meals mostly rice and beans, but I was happier than I'd ever been living in my parents' comfortable Connecticut suburb. Because this was mine. Every line of code, every customer conversation, every small victory belonged to me and the team I'd chosen. The people who actually believed in what we were building. By age 27, 18 months into TerraMetrics, we were hitting real milestones. Our user base had grown to 200 active customers, a mix of community gardens, small urban farms, and educational institutions. Our monthly revenue reached $8,000. Not enough to pay ourselves much, but enough to prove product-market fit. We'd refined our technology significantly, filing for 2 additional patents on our sensor calibration algorithms. When a competitive Boston accelerator program announced applications, Desmond and I knew it was time to apply. The accelerator would provide 3 months of intensive mentorship, access to investors, workspace, and a small amount of funding. More importantly, It would validate TerraMetrics as a serious company. Hundreds of startups applied. Acceptance rate was 8%. The application required extensive documentation, financial projections, product roadmap, team credentials, and recommendation letters from established professionals who could vouch for our capabilities. That's when Blake reached out. We'd been cordial but distant for over a year, exchanging occasional texts but nothing substantive. He called one evening and asked how things were going. I was guarded but civil. He said he'd heard through our mother that I was working on something promising. He apologized for not being more supportive. He said he wanted to help, that he understood now that had been wrong to side with our parents, that he saw I was serious about building something real. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, he was still my brother. We'd been close as children before our parents. Favoritism drove a wedge between us. He offered to write a recommendation letter for my accelerator application. As a partner at a respected law firm, his endorsement would carry weight. I hesitated. Desmond warned me against it. But I thought maybe this was Blake extending an olive branch, trying to repair our relationship by finally supporting my work. I gave him all the information he needed. Company overview, our achievements, my role as co-founder and CEO. He asked thoughtful questions. He seemed genuinely interested. 2 weeks later, he sent me the letter. It looked professional, well-written, appropriately formal. I skimmed it, saw positive phrases, and included it with our application. We submitted everything with hope and anxiety. The first round went extraordinarily well. We had a video interview with 2 accelerator partners who asked sharp questions about our technology and business model. We answered confidently. They seemed impressed. One partner said our approach to democratizing precision agriculture was exactly the kind of innovation they wanted to support. We left that interview certain we'd make the next round. The rejection email arrived 3 weeks later. We regret to inform you that we will not be moving forward with your application. The language was standard, thanking us for our interest, wishing us well. But something felt off. Accelerator rejections usually provided no feedback, but I couldn't accept that after such a strong first interview. I reached out to a contact who'd been through the program the previous year, someone I'd met at a startup event. She made some inquiries through her network. A week later, she called me. The accelerator director had mentioned concerns about leadership stability. Apparently, one of the recommendation letters had raised red flags, describing me as creative but lacking follow-through, mentioning family concerns about my judgment, using phrases like, still finding her way and despite past setbacks. I went cold. There was only one letter that could have done that. I requested a copy through a backdoor contact, someone who worked in the accelerator's operations. What I read made me physically sick. Blake's letter was a masterpiece of subtle sabotage. Every sentence had 2 meanings: praising on the surface, destroying underneath. Harper has pursued her agricultural interests with passion, despite significant setbacks and changes in direction. That sentence made me sound unstable. She demonstrates creativity in her approach, though her family has expressed concerns about the viability of her choices. That sentence made me sound naive. I've watched her try various ventures over the years, and she brings enthusiasm to each new project. That sentence made me sound flighty. It was professional character assassination, coded language that anyone in the tech industry would recognize as damning. I drove to my parents' house unannounced. It was a Tuesday evening, and I knew Blake would be there for the weekly family dinner he never missed. I walked in without knocking, holding the printed letter. My father looked up from the table, annoyed at the interruption. My mother started to speak, but I cut her off. I walked straight to Blake and threw the letter at him. He picked it up, glanced at it, and had the audacity to look confused. What's wrong? The accelerator rejected us because of this letter. Because of what you wrote. He shook his head. Harper, I wrote you a good letter. They must have misunderstood. I read him the worst sentences. He claimed he was trying to be honest and supportive. My father interjected, defending Blake immediately. He tried to help you. Why do you always assume the worst? Something broke in me. Years of accumulated pain, sabotage, dismissal, and betrayal erupted. I listed everything. The fellowship my father destroyed, the investor meeting he torpedoed. Now this. Blake's letter. Every single way they'd undermined me while claiming to care. My mother said I was being paranoid. My father said I was the problem, that I blamed others for my failures. Blake suggested I needed professional help, that I was seeing conspiracies where none existed. I looked at the three of them, and finally saw them clearly. They would never support me. They would never believe in me. They needed me to fail to maintain their worldview. My mother wasn't passive. She was complicit. Blake wasn't clueless. He was calculating. They were a unified force against my success, and they genuinely believed they were helping me. I left and never looked back, blocked their numbers, deleted them from social media, cut off every avenue of communication. Desmond helped me through the breakdown that followed, reminding me that we didn't need that accelerator, that we'd build TerraMetrics without their validation, that my family's sabotage only proved we were onto something threatening. We changed our entire approach, applied to programs in different states, far from my family's networks, sought investors on the West Coast who'd never heard of Richard Bennett, built exclusively in circles where my parents' influence couldn't reach. Every decision was strategic, designed to succeed despite rather than with family support. The next 2 years were warfare, not the dramatic kind with shouting matches and slammed doors, but the insidious kind where obstacles appeared systematically, destroying progress in ways that looked coincidental but never were. I was 27 when the accelerator betrayal happened, and by the time I turned 29, I'd survived 7 more attacks on TerraMetrics, each one more creative than the last. We'd gotten into a different accelerator program, one based in Providence that had no connection to my family's networks. The 3-month program gave us structure, mentorship, and connections to investors who actually cared about agricultural technology. We secured our first real seed funding, $150,000 from a group of West Coast angel investors who'd never heard of my parents. We hired 2 additional engineers. We moved into a small office space in a converted warehouse near the Providence waterfront. For the first time, TerraMetrics felt like an actual company rather than a side project. That's when the landlord troubles started. Our office lease was month to month while we negotiated a longer-term agreement. Everything was proceeding normally until our landlord, a friendly guy named Marcus who owned several properties in the area, suddenly became evasive. He stopped returning calls. The lease renewal documents never materialized. Then, 2 months in, he showed up with unfortunate news. The building ownership had changed hands, he explained, and the new owners wanted to triple our rent immediately, or we needed to leave within 30 days. I later discovered through a mutual connection that the building hadn't changed ownership at all. What had changed was a conversation Marcus had with a building owner 2 blocks over, a man who happened to be connected to my father's commercial real estate network. That man had mentioned that there were questions about our company's stability, concerns from people who knew the founder's family. Marcus, spooked by vague implications of trouble, decided we were too risky to keep as tenants. We scrambled to find new office space, burning through cash on moving expenses and rushed renovations. The disruption set us back 3 months. 2 of our engineers got frustrated with the instability and started looking at other opportunities. I couldn't blame them. From their perspective, we looked disorganized and unreliable. They had no idea we were fighting invisible sabotage. The supplier problems came next. We'd found a reliable hardware manufacturer in New Jersey who produced our sensor components at a reasonable cost. We'd placed orders for 6 months without issue, building up a steady supply chain that let us fulfill customer orders quickly. Then suddenly, shipments started arriving late. Components had mysterious quality issues that required returns and replacements. Our manufacturer, apologetic but unhelpful, kept blaming internal problems while hinting at supply chain complications. Desmond did some detective work and discovered our manufacturer had received inquiries from another company in our space, asking detailed questions about our product specifications and raising concerns about our ability to pay for future orders. That company traced back to a startup that had received investment from the fund where Blake's law school friend worked. The connections were murky, the proof circumstantial, but the pattern was undeniable. My family's influence spread like poison through our industry networks. We switched manufacturers, eating the cost of breaking our existing agreement and retooling with a supplier in Massachusetts. Another 3 months of delays. Another chunk of our limited capital burned. Customer patience wearing thin. Product launches pushed back repeatedly. The stress was destroying me. I woke up at 3 in the morning with panic attacks, convinced we'd run out of money before we could prove our model worked. That's when we hit our first near-death moment. Payroll was due, and we were $20,000 short. Our seed funding had been consumed by all the unexpected costs and delays. Revenue wasn't growing fast enough to cover salaries. Desmond offered to go without pay, but that wasn't fair and wouldn't solve the larger problem. Our engineers needed their salaries. They had rent to pay, families to support. I spent 3 days trying to secure bridge financing, calling every investor contact I had, explaining our situation, begging for help. Most passed. Startups run out of money all the time. We'd missed our milestones. Our metrics weren't compelling enough to justify additional investment. I was sitting in our half-empty office, staring at eviction notices and past due bills, seriously considering shutting everything down. Then I met Lorraine Campbell at a tech conference in Hartford. She was speaking on a panel about overcoming entrepreneurial challenges, a woman in her 50s who'd built and sold 2 successful companies. During the networking session, I approached her with nothing to lose, pitched TerraMetrics in 90 seconds, and probably looked as desperate as I felt. Instead of politely excusing herself, Lorraine asked me to sit down. She wanted to hear the full story. I told her everything: the technology, the market, the traction we'd built, and yes, the family sabotage. I expected skepticism, but Lorraine just nodded. When I finished, she shared her own story. Her parents had been missionaries who believed business was sinful. They'd cut her off completely when she started her first company. She'd spent years fighting not just market challenges but family opposition. She understood intimately what I was facing. Lorraine wrote me a check for $50,000 that afternoon. Not for equity, she insisted. A bridge loan at 0 interest, payable when TerraMetrics became profitable. She said she didn't need the money and wouldn't have what she had if someone hadn't helped her once. More valuable than the money was the mentorship she offered. Weekly calls, introductions to her network, advice on navigating the exact challenges we faced. She became the mother figure I'd never had, supporting without controlling, advising without diminishing. With Lorraine's help, we restructured our business model. We pivoted from focusing on individual community gardens to targeting commercial indoor farms. The market was smaller, but higher value. Commercial farms had real budgets for technology that improved their yields. Our sensors and analytics could save them thousands of dollars monthly by optimizing growing conditions and reducing waste. The margins were better. The contracts were larger. The business became sustainable. But my family wasn't done. 6 months later, we were on the verge of closing a major deal with a regional farm cooperative that managed indoor growing facilities across 3 states. The contract was worth $200,000 annually, our biggest client by far. Everything was proceeding smoothly through negotiations until suddenly it wasn't. The cooperative's board requested additional references, more documentation of our reliability, extra layers of due diligence that weren't standard. I discovered that one board member played golf with my father at their country club. A casual conversation had planted seeds of doubt. Nothing explicit, just gentle questions. Is that the same company Richard Bennett's daughter runs? I've heard there were some challenges with her previous ventures. Concerns about stability. It was enough to make the board cautious, to slow the process, to ultimately reduce the contract terms. We still got the deal, but at 60% of the original value, with additional oversight requirements that no other vendor faced. Then our lead engineer quit. Marcus Chen was brilliant, responsible for much of our core algorithm development. His departure would set us back months. When I asked why, he was honest. A competitor had recruited him aggressively, offering nearly double his salary. But more than that, someone in his network had suggested that TerraMetrics had leadership instability, that staying might hurt his career long term. I couldn't prove my family was behind it, but the language was familiar, the patterns were consistent. We survived these attacks because we had to. Because giving up would mean my parents were right. Because every person who believed in me, every customer who relied on our technology, every team member who'd stuck with us through chaos deserved better than surrender. Lorraine kept reminding me that surviving impossible odds was building something stronger than easy success ever could. By age 28, TerraMetrics had revenue of $500,000 annually. We had 10 employees, real commercial customers, products that genuinely worked and made a difference. Trade publications featured our technology. Agricultural conferences invited me to speak. We were small but legitimate, profitable but still fragile, growing despite systematic opposition. My parents had no idea about any of this. I'd kept them completely in the dark for over a year. They still told people I was trying to make my little farming app work, dismissing it as a hobby that would eventually fail. Blake had gotten married to Charlotte from Columbia Law, and they were expecting their first child, the golden grandchild for the golden son. Family gatherings happened without me. Holiday photos were posted on social media, everyone smiling, the perfect Bennett family, minus the disappointment daughter who'd apparently cut them off for no reason. But I was building something they couldn't touch, couldn't diminish, couldn't destroy. And every attack they launched only made me more determined to prove that I didn't need their approval, their support, or their validation to succeed. The innovation that changed everything emerged from desperation. We were 28 months into TerraMetrics, and while we were profitable, growth was plateauing. Our sensor technology was solid, but competitors were catching up. We needed something proprietary, something that would give us a real competitive advantage. Our engineering team had been experimenting with machine learning algorithms that could predict crop yields based on environmental data, but the accuracy was inconsistent, hovering around 70%. Then one of our newer engineers, a quiet woman named Rachel Kim, fresh out of Stanford's AI program, suggested a completely different approach to training the model. Instead of using general agricultural data, what if we trained the algorithm specifically on data from our own sensors, learning the unique patterns of indoor and controlled environment farming? It seemed obvious in retrospect, but nobody had tried it. We spent 3 months refining the approach, running countless simulations, testing with customer data. The results were stunning. Our algorithm could predict crop yields with 94% accuracy 2 weeks before harvest. More importantly, it could identify exactly which environmental factors to adjust to improve yields. A farm could see that increasing humidity by 3% and adjusting LED light spectrum slightly would boost their lettuce production by 18%, while reducing water usage by 12%. The value proposition was crystal clear, measurable, and undeniable. We filed for the patent immediately and made it the centerpiece of our product offering. Within 6 months, our revenue jumped to $3.5 million annually. Customers weren't just paying for sensors anymore. They were paying for intelligence that directly improved their profitability. We expanded from 10 employees to 50. We had customers in 12 states, with serious inquiries from Canadian farms and European growing operations. I was finally able to take a decent salary, move to a nicer apartment, and for the first time since college, felt financially stable. That's when the acquisition interest began. First, it was Heritage Agricultural Solutions, a legacy farming technology company trying to modernize its offerings. Their vice president reached out through LinkedIn, asking for an exploratory call. Then Vertical Farms Incorporated, a newer company focused on urban agriculture infrastructure, expressed interest in potential partnership or acquisition. Finally, Quantum Dynamics, a major tech company trying to break into the agricultural space, requested a meeting to discuss strategic opportunities. I wasn't actively looking to sell TerraMetrics. We were growing well, the mission felt unfinished, and I loved the work. but the conversations were intriguing. Lorraine advised me to take the meetings, learn what we were worth, understand what strategic options existed. These discussions, she reminded me, were valuable even if I decided not to sell. They were validation that WED built something significant. That's when my father launched his final, most desperate attack. I don't know how he found out about the acquisition conversations. Maybe someone in his network worked at one of the acquiring companies. Maybe Blake was still feeding them information through channels I hadn't discovered. However it happened, my father learned that TerraMetrics was being courted by major players, and he couldn't stand it. He contacted Quantum Dynamics directly, called their corporate development office, and asked to speak with someone handling agricultural technology acquisitions. Introduced himself as Richard Bennett, father of Harper Bennett, CEO of TerraMetrics. Said he had important information they should know before proceeding. Claimed I had legal issues in my background, unresolved disputes with former business partners, a pattern of instability that made me a risky leadership prospect. All completely fabricated, lies designed to torpedo the potential deal. Except this time, it backfired spectacularly. Quantum Dynamics had a sophisticated corporate development team that immediately fact-checked everything. They ran background checks, finding absolutely nothing to support any of the claims. They contacted our investors and customers, all of whom gave stellar references. They realized within 48 hours that someone was actively trying to sabotage their potential acquisition target. The corporate development director called me directly, explained what had happened, said they'd investigated thoroughly and found no validity to any concerns raised. Then he said something I'll never forget. The fact that you built this company despite someone working this aggressively to undermine you makes us significantly more interested, not less. That kind of resilience and determination is exactly what we look for in founders we want to work with. My father's sabotage had become proof of my strength. His attacks had documented my ability to succeed despite opposition. Every obstacle had created was evidence that I could overcome anything. The irony was almost poetic. 3 weeks later, we landed our biggest contract yet. A national grocery chain was launching a vertical farming initiative to grow produce in urban locations near their stores. They wanted our technology to power their facilities across 35 locations. The multi-year deal was worth $5 million, more revenue than WED generated in our entire history. The contract signing was covered by business media. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature on innovative agricultural technology companies, and TerraMetrics was prominently featured alongside my photo and story. My father saw the article, I know because my mother called for the first time in 18 months, leaving a voicemail that started with, "We saw you in the Wall Street Journal." She sounded surprised, almost hurt. "We always believed in you," she said, rewriting history with stunning audacity. "We'd love to reconnect. Your father wants to talk." I deleted the message halfway through. Blake sent an email. Long, rambling, claiming he wanted to apologize but somehow making it about his feelings. He said he hadn't realized how serious TerraMetrics was. He mentioned that his law firm did corporate work and could help with contracts at family rates. Even his apology was an angle, an attempt to benefit from what I'd built. I didn't respond. That's when Quantum Dynamics came back with a serious offer. $6 million, all cash, for complete acquisition of TerraMetrics. They wanted to integrate our technology into their precision agriculture platform, scale it globally, and keep me on as division head for 2 years with an attractive retention package. The offer was flattering but lower than I thought we were worth. Lorraine advised me to counter, reminding me that the grocery chain contract had proven our value was higher than they were offering. The negotiation took 4 months. Multiple rounds of due diligence, legal reviews, discussions about valuation methodology, and growth projections. Quantum kept pointing to our small size and need for their infrastructure. I kept pointing to our unique technology, strong growth trajectory, and the defensibility of our patents. We went back and forth on price, on retention terms, on what autonomy I'd have running the division. We finally settled at $8.5 million, $6 million in cash at closing, $2.5 million in quantum stock that would vest over 2 years. More importantly, I negotiated strong retention packages for every single TerraMetrics employee. Nobody who'd stuck with me through the grinding years would be left behind. The technology would continue to be developed with the mission intact. I'd stay as division head for 2 years, after which I could cash out completely and decide my next chapter. I signed the term sheet on a Thursday afternoon in October. The deal wasn't public yet, waiting for regulatory approvals and coordinated press announcements, but it was real, legally binding. TerraMetrics would be acquired for $8.5 million. After taxes and investor distributions, my personal payout would be $4.8 million. 4 years of work, countless attacks, years of family sabotage, and I'd built something worth millions despite every attempt to stop me. The unexpected invitation came 6 weeks before the acquisition would close and be publicly announced. My mother left a voicemail on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was careful, almost tentative. "Harper, I know it's been a long time, but we're hoping you'll come to Thanksgiving this year. Blake and Charlotte have big news to share, she's expecting, and it would mean so much to have the whole family together. We miss you. Your father and I would really like to put the past behind us. Please think about it." An hour later, my Aunt Rebecca called. My mother's younger sister, the one family member who'd always been kind to me, the one who'd slipped me encouraging notes at family gatherings when I was a teenager. Rebecca didn't play games. "Harper, your mother asked me to call because she thinks you'll actually answer for me. She's not wrong. I just want you to know that they're asking you to come to Thanksgiving, and I hope you will. Not for them, for you. Sometimes facing the people who hurt us is how we prove to ourselves that we've moved beyond their power to hurt us. But if you don't come, I understand completely." I spent 3 days debating. The deal was signed but not announced. Part of me wanted to show up at Thanksgiving, sit through dinner, and then casually drop the news that I'd just sold my company for $8.5 million. The fantasy was satisfying. My father's face going white. My mother's carefully constructed smile cracking. Blake's shock as he realized his perfect trajectory had been eclipsed by the sister head dismissed. But Lorraine warned me against it. You don't owe them a dramatic moment. You don't need their reaction for your success to be real. The healthiest thing might be to not go at all, to let them remain in their bubble while you move forward with your life. Desmond agreed. Why give them the satisfaction of seeing you care about their opinion enough to show up? In the end, I went anyway. Not because I needed their approval or even their acknowledgement. I went because I wanted to close the circle. I wanted to sit at that table one last time and see them clearly, without the fog of self-doubt that had clouded every previous family gathering. I wanted to face them as an equal, as someone who'd succeeded specifically by ignoring their guidance. And yes, I wanted them to know. I prepared carefully, got my hair done at an actual salon for the first time in years. Bought an outfit that looked professional but not flashy, quality without designer labels. Brought an expensive bottle of wine, the kind my father pretended to know about. I practiced what I'd say in my car during the drive to Connecticut. I'd be calm, factual, not angry. I'd simply state what had happened and leave. No drama, just truth. Their house looked exactly as I remembered. Same perfect lawn, same meticulous landscaping, same impression of a life carefully curated for external approval. Extended family cars filled the driveway. I counted 15 people through the window before I rang the doorbell. My mother answered, surprise and something like relief crossing her face. "You came," she said, hugging me awkwardly. "I'm so glad." Inside, the scene was familiar enough to hurt. Blake and Charlotte sat at the center of the living room, her hand resting on her visible baby bump, everyone's attention orbiting around them. My cousins were there, most of whom had stopped returning my messages 2 years ago when my parents' version of events had poisoned the family narrative. Aunt Rebecca hugged me warmly, whispering, "You look strong, good for you." Dinner began with the usual Bennett efficiency. My mother orchestrated everything from the kitchen. My father carved the turkey with ceremonial precision. Blake told stories about his partnership and upcoming fatherhood while everyone listened adoringly. I was seated at the far end of the table, physically and symbolically distant from the center of attention. Several cousins asked what I was up to these days, polite but vague, the kind of questions you ask when you expect disappointing answers. My father asked first, cutting into his turkey with affected casualness. "So, Harper, what are you up to these days? Still working on that farming thing?" His tone was dismissive, the question designed to be a gentle humiliation disguised as familial interest. I said simply, "Yes, still working on TerraMetrics." My mother chimed in with false brightness. "Oh, that's still going? I didn't realize you were still doing that." Blake's wife, Charlotte, meaning well but steeped in the family's condescension, said, "That's the agriculture app thing, right? That's so interesting that you stuck with it." The meal continued. Blake announced that they were having a boy, planning to name him Richard after our father. My father nearly cried with pride. My mother started planning the nursery. The conversation swirled around the coming grandchild, the perfect continuation of the perfect family line. I ate quietly, observing rather than participating, and felt nothing but clarity. These people didn't know me. They never had. Then came the moment that made the entire evening worth it. After the main course but before dessert, my father stood to make a toast. Head had 2 glasses of wine, enough to make him expansive and sentimental. He talked about family, about success, about the importance of following proper paths. He gestured at Blake and Charlotte, praising their achievements and choices. Then he turned to me. "And we hope that Harper will eventually find her way. Not everyone is meant for traditional success, and that's okay. We love all our children, even when they choose unusual paths. Harper is our disappointment daughter, but we love her despite her choices." He said it with a smile, like it was an affectionate nickname, a gentle joke, but the room went silent. Several cousins looked uncomfortable. Aunt Rebecca closed her eyes. Even Blake looked shocked at the cruelty, though he said nothing. I stood up slowly. Everyone expected me to leave crying or to explode in anger. I did neither. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and reread the message I'd received that morning from Quantum Dynamics. The final regulatory approvals had cleared. The acquisition would be announced in 2 weeks. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. I looked at my father and smiled genuinely for the first time all evening. "You're right, Dad. Not everyone follows traditional paths. My agricultural technology company just sold for $8.5 million. The room went completely silent. I closed in 2 weeks. After 4 years of building something real. I showed him the email on my phone, the Quantum Dynamics Corporate Development Director confirming final terms and the closing date. "Despite everything you did to stop me." My father's face went white. The fork actually fell from my mother's hand, clattering against her plate. Blake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Aunt Rebecca started crying, but they were happy tears. My cousins' reactions ranged from shock to confusion to what looked like admiration. My father stammered, "That's not possible. How?" I told him he could verify it himself. Quantum Dynamics was a publicly traded company. The acquisition would be announced in 2 weeks. He could read about it in the Wall Street Journal if he wanted confirmation from a source he actually trusted. My mother tried to interrupt. "Why didn't you tell us? You never told us it was doing this well." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Why would I tell you? So you could sabotage it again?" I listed what they'd done, calmly and factually. The fellowship they destroyed, the investors they poisoned, the landlords and suppliers they scared away. The recommendation letter Blake wrote that tanked our accelerator application. Every attack, every betrayal, every attempt to undermine what I was building. Blake's face showed guilt he couldn't hide. He tried to speak but couldn't find words. My father attempted to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I'm not done." I told them about the board member my father talked to who nearly killed our biggest contract, the engineer who quit after someone spread rumors about leadership instability, the Quantum Dynamics contact my father tried to poison with lies about my background. Every single thing they'd done, I laid out clearly and without anger. You called me your disappointment daughter tonight, but am not disappointed in myself anymore. I built something meaningful. I helped farmers grow food more efficiently. I created technology that's making a real difference. And I did it without you. Actually, despite you. The only disappointment in this room is that you're my parents. I picked up the wine glass it brought, still full because it'd been too nervous to drink. Enjoy your perfect son and his perfect life. I don't need your approval anymore. I never did. I walked toward the door. Aunt Rebecca followed me into the hallway, grabbed my shoulders, and hugged me hard while crying. I'm so proud of you. I always believed you could do it. Your mother and I grew up with the same controlling parents, and I know exactly what she became. You broke the cycle. You're free. Two of my younger cousins, Madison and Tyler, came out after her. They apologized for believing the family narrative, for not reaching out, for letting themselves be manipulated. I forgave them immediately. They were collateral damage, not perpetrators. I drove away from that house feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because I'd gotten revenge, though the vindication was sweet, but because I'd finally, completely, stopped caring what they thought. Their opinions had no power anymore. Their approval was irrelevant. I'd proven to myself, not to them, that my dreams had value. The fallout from Thanksgiving was immediate and messy. My parents called 17 times over the next 3 days. I didn't answer. They left voicemails that evolved from angry to conciliatory to almost desperate. My father's messages shifted from, "You can't just make accusations like that," to, "We were trying to protect you," to, "Maybe we made some mistakes." My mother cried on voicemail, saying she never meant to hurt me, that Shed only wanted what was best, that family should forgive each other. Blake sent a 5-page email at 2 in the morning. It was rambling, defensive, but contained fragments of genuine remorse. He wrote about the pressure of being the golden child, about never being allowed to fail, about resenting my freedom to pursue my passions while had been forced into a predetermined path. I'm sorry I didn't realize how serious TerraMetrics was. I'm sorry I wrote that letter. I'm sorry I always chose them over you. His law firm could help with the acquisition paperwork at family rates, he offered. Even his apology contained an angle. I deleted the email without finishing it. 2 weeks later, the acquisition closed. I sat in a conference room at Quantum Dynamics headquarters in San Francisco, signing document after document while lawyers explained terms I already understood. Desmond sat beside me, signing his own paperwork, both of us trying not to look as overwhelmed as we felt. The wire transfer hit my account that afternoon. $4.8 million after taxes and investor distributions. I checked my phone 3 times to make sure the number was real. The ripple effects through my parents' social circle were immediate and humiliating for them. Their country club friends asked pointed questions. "Didn't you say your daughter was wasting her time on some farming app? Wasn't she the one who couldn't hold down a real job?" The acquisition was covered in local Connecticut business news, including my photo and quotes about disrupting agricultural technology. My mother couldn't face her book club. My father's reputation at the club took a visible hit. People remembered his dismissive comments about my work, his certainty that it'd never amount to anything. Blake's marriage started showing strain. Charlotte, to her credit, was furious when she found out the full extent of what the Bennett family had done to me. She'd known only the sanitized version, the story about a troubled daughter who'd cut off her loving family for inexplicable reasons. When the truth emerged, she questioned everything about the family she'd married into. Blake's comfortable narrative about his perfect family supporting each other cracked. Suddenly, he had to defend the indefensible. My father showed up at my apartment 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. I saw him through the peephole and didn't open the door. We talked through the door like strangers. He claimed he'd been protecting me, that tough love had been necessary, that he couldn't have known it actually succeed. I told him the truth. He'd never accept. "You didn't love me. You tried to destroy me." When he broke down and said they'd been wrong, that he was sorry, that they wanted another chance, I told him it was too late. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. The relationship had died years ago. This was just acknowledging the corpse. Blake tried one more time, meeting me at a neutral coffee shop because I refused to see him anywhere private. He was genuinely remorseful this time. No angles or offers of business help. I was jealous of your freedom. I did what they wanted, became who they demanded, and I resented that you had the courage to refuse. You were always the brave one. I looked at my brother and saw a stranger who had made choices that couldn't be unmade. You had options every single time. You chose them. You could have chosen me, just once, and you never did. I told him that maybe someday we could rebuild something, but not now. Maybe not ever, he cried. I didn't. We parted as acquaintances who happened to share DNA. The money changed my practical life but not my fundamental character. I paid off every debt, set up investment accounts that would generate passive income, bought a modest house in rural Vermont, 300 acres with a small farmhouse that needed work. I started an organic farm as a genuine hobby, growing vegetables and working with soil, finally doing what my 7-year-old self had dreamed of before my father threw away those tomato seedlings. I donated $500,000 to establish a scholarship fund for students from unsupportive families pursuing agricultural sciences. The Harper Bennett Fellowship, ironically named after the fellowship my father had destroyed, would help others who faced similar barriers. The application specifically asked about family opposition and how applicants had persevered despite it. The celebration for my TerraMetrics team was everything the Bennett family Thanksgiving wasn't. We rented out a small restaurant in Providence, invited everyone who'd worked on the company plus their families, and I gave everyone bonuses that reflected their loyalty through the hardest times. Desmond and I stood at the front of the room, both of us emotional, and thanked people who'd believed when belief was irrational. Lorraine spoke at the party, telling everyone that this was what real family looked like. People who chose each other and fought for each other and celebrated each other's wins without jealousy or conditions. I stayed on as division head at Quantum Dynamics, honoring my 2-year commitment. The work was still meaningful, now with resources to scale our technology globally. My algorithms were helping thousands of farmers reduce waste and increase yields. I received letters from farmers thanking me for technology that had saved their operations or allowed them to expand. That impact, not the money, was the real measure of success. Aunt Rebecca and I developed a genuine relationship, meeting monthly for lunch in the small town between Vermont and Connecticut. She told me stories about growing up with my mother, about their own controlling parents, about how she'd chosen art over medicine and been ostracized for years. We built a bond as the family black sheep, supporting each other in ways our families never had. 2 of my cousins, Madison and Tyler, also stayed in touch, visiting my farm and slowly rebuilding relationships free from their parents' interference. Christmas came 6 months after the acquisition. A card arrived from my parents with a formal apology letter enclosed. Richard and Patricia Bennett regretted their past actions, acknowledged they'd been wrong to interfere with my choices, asked for a chance to rebuild our relationship. The apology was sincere enough, written carefully, probably drafted and redrafted. I read it multiple times, trying to feel something beyond exhausted indifference. I filed the letter away. Maybe someday it'd be ready to respond. Maybe I never would. Either way was acceptable. The unexpected peace came gradually. I worked in my garden most mornings, literally playing in the dirt like it always wanted. I consulted remotely for Quantum, mentored 3 young entrepreneurs through my incubator program, and dated someone kind and stable who respected my work without needing to understand every technical detail. Life was quiet, purposeful, free from the constant tension of family warfare. Then came the Wall Street Journal feature request. A reporter was writing about women breaking barriers in agricultural technology and wanted to profile my story. I almost declined. The idea of making my family drama public felt uncomfortable. But Lorraine convinced me. Your story isn't just about you. It's about every person who's been told their dreams don't matter. Every child who's been dismissed by the people who should champion them. Sharing it might help someone else survive what you survived. The article ran 6 months later. a detailed profile of my journey from disappointment daughter to successful founder. The reporter had been thorough, interviewing my team, my investors, even getting comments from people in the agricultural technology community. The piece went viral in entrepreneurship circles. Thousands of people reached out, sharing their own stories of family rejection, of building success despite opposition, of choosing their dreams over their family's expectations. I created an online support community for entrepreneurs from unsupportive families. Within 3 months, it had 5,000 members from 40 countries. People shared resources, offered encouragement, celebrated wins that their families dismissed. The community filled the gap that families should have filled but didn't. It proved that family isn't just biology. Family is whoever shows up when you need them. 1 year after the acquisition, I wake up in my Vermont farmhouse to morning light filtering through windows I installed myself. My bedroom overlooks 30 acres of vegetables growing in careful rows, a small commercial operation that supplies 3 local restaurants and a farmer's market. I'm 30 years old, consulting part-time for quantum dynamics from my home office, running an incubator that's helped launch 7 agricultural technology startups, and living the exact life I imagined when I was a child, before anyone told me my dreams were worthless. The daily reality is quiet in ways that still surprise me. I check on my plants before breakfast, video call with my mentorship students mid-morning, work on business strategy for a few hours, then spend afternoons in my workshop building prototype sensors for fun rather than necessity. I'm dating someone who works as a veterinarian in the next town over, someone who understands rural life and finds my obsession with soil composition endearing rather than embarrassing. We're not serious yet, but it's healthy in ways my past relationships never were, because I'm healthy in ways I never was before. My parents send occasional messages that I read but rarely answer, not because I'm angry anymore, but because I'm indifferent. They're strangers who happen to share my genetic code. They ask about visiting the farm, meeting for coffee, rebuilding our relationship. My responses are polite but non-committal. Maybe someday. Not now. I'm busy. The truth is, I don't miss them. The family I grieved losing never actually existed. I mourned an imaginary relationship, and letting go of that fantasy was the most liberating thing I've ever done. Blake's journey has been unexpectedly parallel to mine. He started therapy after our coffee shop conversation and began unpacking his own damage from our parents' conditional love. Has realized has been living their life rather than his own, that his perfect trajectory was a prison head never questioned. Hez thinking about leaving law to teach, something Head always wanted to do but never admitted. We text occasionally now, cordial but careful. Baby Richard is 6 months old, and Blake sends photos sometimes. I sent a gift when he was born. Small steps toward something that might eventually resemble a relationship, but it'll take years if it happens at all. The incubator program I created has become my most meaningful work. 7 startups launched so far, 3 founded by people with family rejection stories similar to mine. I provide funding, mentorship, and most importantly, unwavering support. When one founder's parents tried to interfere with their business, I helped them build protective barriers. When another struggled with self-doubt planted by years of criticism, I reminded them weekly that their work had value regardless of family approval. We're creating a community of people who understand what it means to succeed despite rather than because of family. I wrote a letter to my younger self that I keep in my desk drawer, pulling it out when doubt creeps in. It says, "It gets better. You are not the problem. Your dreams are valid. Keep going despite their voices in your head. You'll find your people, eventually. And one day, you'll be proud of who you became. Specifically because you became yourself, rather than who they wanted." The letter is for me, but also for every person who reaches out through the online community, looking for permission to choose themselves over their family's expectations. The Wall Street Journal article's viral spread taught me something unexpected. My story isn't unique. Thousands of people succeed despite family opposition, building lives that matter specifically by ignoring those who should have championed them but didn't. The support community exploded to 15,000 members worldwide. People share resources for dealing with family estrangement, celebrate wins that their families dismiss, and find belonging among strangers who understand what biological family never did. What I've learned about family is this: blood doesn't guarantee love. Family is who shows up when everything falls apart, who celebrates wins without jealousy, who supports without controlling. You can't force people to see your worth no matter how much you achieve. Sometimes the healthiest choice is leaving permanently. You can forgive without forgetting and without reconciling. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. And found family, people who choose to show up for you, is just as real as biological family, often more so. About success, I've learned that external validation is empty. Every achievement I earned while seeking my parents' approval felt hollow. The wins that mattered came after I stopped caring what they thought. Success isn't proving others wrong, it's proving yourself right. Money helps, don't get me wrong, but peace and purpose matter infinitely more. Impact on other people's lives, the farmers using my technology or the entrepreneurs I mentor, that's the measure of whether my work matters. And resilience, the ability to keep building despite opposition, that's forged through hardship in ways easy success never creates. Here is the paradox I never expected. I'm grateful for the struggle now. Not immediately, not during the attacks, but looking back, I see how their opposition forced me to believe in myself when no external support existed. I couldn't rely on family encouragement or inherited credibility. Every win was genuinely mine, earned without their help, proof that I was capable regardless of their judgment. The hardship built real confidence that no amount of praise could have created. I wouldn't change my path even knowing the pain it involved, because that pain shaped me into someone I'm genuinely proud to be. My parents haven't changed fundamentally. They send messages rewriting history, claiming they always believed in me, asking why I'm punishing them for minor mistakes. They'll never truly understand what they did or why it was devastating. Maybe one day I'll have coffee with them, let them meet their grandchildren if I have any, participate in some version of family, but it'll be on my terms, with firm boundaries, and only if they demonstrate actual change over years rather than months. I'm not holding my breath, and I'm okay with that. The current mission that drives me is breaking the cycle of conditional love. Every startup I help launch, every entrepreneur I mentor through family opposition, every person in the online community who finds courage to pursue their dreams despite their family's disapproval, that's contributing to something larger than TerraMetrics ever was. I'm creating spaces where people's worth isn't measured by their family's expectations but by their own values and impact. Teaching technical skills matters, but teaching emotional resilience matters even more. This afternoon, I'm teaching a workshop at my farm for 6 young entrepreneurs. We're working in the garden, and I'm showing them how to grow food from seed to harvest, using it as a metaphor for building businesses. Patient cultivation. Weathering storms. Trusting the process even when growth is invisible underground. One student asks the question I knew was coming. Do you talk to your parents now? I pause, thinking about how to answer honestly, without crushing her hope for her own family reconciliation. Sometimes healing means moving forward without closure. I don't need them to understand for my success to be real. I just needed to believe in myself. That belief, once I found it, was enough. The sun is setting over my farm as the workshop ends. Students are laughing, trading contact information, making plans to support each other's ventures. My phone buzzes with a text from Desmond. He's thinking about our next venture, a platform to help other incubators scale their support for underrepresented founders. I smile and type back, "Let's do it." Because that's the truth they never understood. I'm not trying to prove them wrong anymore. I'm building because I love building. I'm helping others because I remember what it felt like when nobody helped me. I'm creating the world I wished had existed when I was 25 and alone and convinced I was the problem. They called me their disappointment daughter. Turns out, I was just disappointing their expectations, and that was the best thing I ever did. So, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between your dreams and your family's expectations? Have you built something despite people telling you it was impossible? Drop your story in the comments because I read every single one, and your experience might help someone else who's struggling right now. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you courage or confirmation that you're not alone, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because I share stories every week about people who succeeded by refusing to give up on themselves. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dreams matter even if their family doesn't believe in them yet. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of a community that understands that family isn't just who you're born to, but who shows up when it matters. And remember, if you're the disappointment child in your family, maybe you're not disappointing at all. Maybe you're just brave enough to be yourself. That's not a failure. That's freedom. And freedom, I promise you, is worth fighting for. Now go build something amazing. And don't let anyone, not even the people who raised you, convince you that your dreams are too small or too strange or too impossible. Because they're not. They're yours. And that makes them exactly right.